Hello, friends. Thanks for checking in. This week we have Florence Shalom as our guest, or Flo, as we were calling her throughout the podcast. Flo is a mother, speaker of Dutch as a second language, which there's not many of that. There's not many of those out there, and communications and events manager for the organization Network of Wellbeing. Flo's core passions lie in connecting people and communities and supporting others to make a positive difference in their own lives and the wider world. In this podcast, we talk about compassion and its relationship to our well-being and our society's well-being. We cover self-compassion, compassion for others, and distinguish the difference between empathy and compassion. We discuss the radical nature of compassion in a world which is congested with judgment, othering, and dehumanizing. This is an area I'm particularly passionate about, so it was a real delight to have Flo on. If you want to learn more about Flo and her work, please check out the links below to her Twitter page and the Network of Wellbeing website. Thanks for listening, guys. All the best.
Hello, friends. Welcome back to the podcast. Today, our guest is Florence Scialom. Welcome to the podcast, Florence.
Hi. Thanks very much. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. First and foremost, what's the crack? How are we keeping?
Oh, wow. Great first question. Doing well, I'm mildly aware that my little daughter's just gone to sleep, hoping she's not going to wake up. But otherwise, loving life.
Great. How was your Christmas period?
Yeah, it was nice. I actually got a kind of good 2 weeks off work, which was amazing and like much needed to have just like a real rest over that, end of year period.
Fantastic.
So yeah, it was good. It was a shame, I didn't get to see as many family as I'd have wanted because of COVID and whatnot, but otherwise it was lovely.
Great. Because I often wonder about like organizations, say the one that you're at, Network of Wellbeing. It's like they better really emphasize that they're about well-being for their staff.
Yeah.
They're under more pressure.
It's funny. Sometimes we have a little joke about it internally, like when we get a bit busy and we're a bit overwhelmed, we're like, oh, can't get too stressed out working at the Network of Wellbeing. But no, I mean, we do try as much as we can to practice what we preach. And, like, for example, we're a small team of like 6 members of staff and we all work part-time.
Okay.
And we all kind of try and, take our holidays and have quite flexible working. So, understand that we live full lives. We've got other things alongside our work, other responsibilities and passions. So I love that about working for that kind of small charity that's focused on well-being,
A friend of mine, he's a top guy in an organization, and he was telling me that he gave this speech not too long ago, and he said to his staff, he goes, guys, I don't expect you to give 100%. He goes, I have 2 kids and they don't get 100%. So I don't expect you to be giving 100%. He goes, you come in here, you give me a 75. I'll really, really appreciate that, because I know you have a life out there, as do I,
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's so often missing, isn't it? Like from a lot of workplaces, just seeing people as full people and acknowledging, you do have like work, like a life outside of your responsibilities at work. And obviously COVID has been like terrible in so many ways, but I do think one of the few positives that has come out of it is people acknowledging the kind of balance of things more, like parents having to be more flexible, people having to adjust to caring responsibilities and stuff, people seeing into each other's lives a bit more through being online.
Totally. Flo, for people who are unfamiliar with you or your work, it's probably, we and Seb always say it's the hardest question that we ask. Can you tell us a bit about yourself? How did you end up where you are?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a lovely question, but but at the same time hard indeed talking about yourself. But I work for the Network of Wellbeing, like you've mentioned, which is a small charity based in Devon in the UK. I actually live in Rotterdam in the Netherlands, and that's been a bit of a roundabout journey, how I've come to be living in a separate place to my work, which I've done for almost 10 years now. But I when I first came to the Netherlands, I studied sociology and anthropology, and I wanted to do my research on kind of an alternative way of living, basically. So there's like this idea of kind of development and progress being about like, financial gain and status and and all of these things. And I was really aware that, often that's not what makes us happy and well as people. And also, that's a model that's being pushed, kind of economic development's being pushed internationally, but actually like there's a lot of developed countries in inverted commas that aren't actually happy with the model that they're living within. So I was really interested in that, and that took me to this small town in Devon called Totnes, where it was the home of the Transition Towns movement, which is an environmental movement where they, focus on what can we do at the community level to tackle, the environmental challenges we face. And I was really interested in like the way that they were setting up community projects and the way that they were trying to do things a bit differently, And so I went to Totnes to do this research, and through that I met this project, the Network of Wellbeing, that I'm now working for. And they were very much about like, economic growth, like monetary gain, status is not what makes us happy. Actually, human connection to nature, like having a deeper sense of meaning and purpose in our lives. These are the kind of things that really, help us to feel truly well. And how can we kind of challenge that mainstream narrative? How can we create new narratives, new values, and examples of putting these new narratives and values into practice? So, I was really inspired by that. And even though I kind of came back to the Netherlands to finish my studies and like write up my research, after I did that, I started working with the Network of Wellbeing, and I've been working there ever since. I work as the communications and events manager, so we run a lot of different online and offline events, and we've got a little retreat centre in Devon, and we've got a shared library of things project as well, which is kind of looking at how people can share and connect more rather than kind of needing to own everything yourself. So looking at different ways that we can share learning and practices around sustainable well-being, really.
Fantastic, Flo. It's the first thing that came to mind is, by any chance have you heard of Christopher Boyce?
I have, and you know what? I was researching your guys' podcast, and I saw him on there. And actually, I've met Christopher a few times through my work, and he even came to a research event in Rotterdam University about happiness, and we met there. But also, I've also travelled to Bhutan as part of my own personal. Yeah, as part of my own personal journey. So I guess to tell you a bit more like about that journey that started with the Totnes, but it's kind of continued on. I've gone deeper into looking at like what's that relationship between our inner practices of things like mindfulness and compassion, and then the kind of change we want to see in the outer world, the social change that we know we need to see. Part of that journey, that's taken me to lots of different places and trainings and that kind of thing. But part of that was going to Bhutan. So I really connected with Christopher, followed his blog, like really excited about his book coming out.
Oh, fantastic. Christopher's actually a good friend of mine now. We keep him very close. So
nice.
I'll definitely let him know.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. He's a lovely guy, and like incredible. The journey that he did, the cycle all the way to Bhutan, was like, I was so inspired by that, for sure.
Because what you were talking about there, just on your intro, your introduction to yourself, I just thought, geez, this is exactly what Christopher is talking about, how we're pitched this idea of success, right? And then we often have the sense or like the experience that this pitch is not actually fulfilling what we thought it would fulfill. And then we have this weird dynamic where some of us are questioning how we feel. Oh, maybe I feel like this because I'm not successful enough, or I need to do this or I need to do that, rather than addressing potentially maybe the pitch that we were pitched was never actually destined. It's not designed for our well-being. It's designed as an economic model.
Exactly. It's designed to keep the system ticking over, and yeah, for sure. And like, I think that's why, yeah, it's actually, this is shown in research, be it like on a personal level, beyond a certain level of income, our happiness level doesn't increase. So I think it's really important to point out, when we get into these conversations, of course, we know, like in happiness research, that it's important for people to have their basic needs met, for food and shelter. But and beyond that, of course, like to some extent, having like material needs met can bring a certain level of well-being and happiness, but up to a certain point, and it's not kind of continuous. Just like on the personal level, our income exponentially increasing doesn't make us that level of happiness. You can just look at examples of people winning the lottery but then going back down to the kind of same level of happiness that they had previous. So that's on a very personal level. And then on the kind of wider societal level, we're sold the narrative that economic growth is what we should be aiming for as a society, and we're constantly reported in the news like growth statistics have gone up by this much and that's supposed to be a good thing, and if they've gone down, or that's something to worry about. But actually, if you unpick it a little bit, you realize, endless economic growth on a finite planet that we live on is not sustainable, but also it's not even desirable. What does it really mean, like kind of these rises in economic growth? It just means an increase in production and throughput of the kind of material economy, but it doesn't necessarily contribute to people's well-being. I often hear examples of like, if someone gets in a car accident and their car gets written off, they have to have repairs, there has to be someone to come and care for them, etc. That could add figures to GDP. But if that same person just went for a walk in the woods, that doesn't add anything to the figures. But so like we're kind of measuring and focusing on the wrong things, both at the individual and at the societal level, I'd say.
Like, do you think COVID and this like kind of 2 years that we've gone through, this like almost forced pause or reset potentially, do you think that's one benefit, the very few benefits that COVID has brought us? Because I talked to a lot of friends, because only recently I was going through a bit of a kind of, oh God, is this really what my life is going to be like? Just locking in and out, like doing a job that I couldn't really care. I don't hate it, but it doesn't do anything for me. I don't get to Friday and feel a sense of pride or anything in what I've done in the past week. And I was like, God, is this really going to be me for the next 40 years? And I talked to friends and all these friends that I thought were killing it in London and, getting promotion after promotion and this, that, and the other. A lot of them were like, yeah, listen, man, I'm just like, it's not like I don't hate it, but it's just apathy, which I was saying to him in a phone call before. Like, I think apathy is one of the saddest states of the human mind, because I just think it means like complete just lack of hope. And a lot of them were telling me that they were just like, man, I don't want to do this either. I don't know what I want to do. I know that this isn't for me for the rest of my life, but equally, I don't have something that was like, oh, this is my actual passion, or this is what's going to make me happy, and this is what I want to do for the next 40 years. But at least that we've been able to kind of take a step back, see the wood for the trees, and have that research. Do you think have you found that in your work that's been a positive?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like got many different aspects, hasn't it, that question? I think for sure there has been some elements of that. Like, I think that a kind of the collective pause that's been enforced, obviously had some really negative impacts and had some unexpected kind of opportunities for some in terms of having that slowing down, like slowing down and not being forced into like really long commutes, and having that opportunity to kind of look at your life from a bit of a distance and reflect on like what you spend your time on and that kind of thing. I think and I think in our work at the Network of Wellbeing, well, we've like kind of done a lot more online events and found that there's a real sense of community that's emerged in a lot of groups, albeit like people missing, and wanting to combine that online with face-to-face contact when possible. But that sense of community has been able to be fostered in different ways through this time. So I think, there's been like that slowing down, that kind of space for reflection and that sense of community for some people. And then, of course, COVID's also highlighted like deeper societal issues like massive inequality, and then people that aren't able to take that time out, haven't had those opportunities. So I think it's like a real mixed impact in that way, I guess I'd say. And I guess on the wider level, there's a hope that, having that opportunity could kind of create that, that space in society to kind of rethink the way that we're doing things. And I think jury's still out a little bit on whether that opportunity will be taken, really. But I really want to pick up on one thing you said there, Seb, about you having the perception of your friends killing it in London and stuff. I think that's so common, and like that comparison to others' lives, so common and so damaging. Like, it's so easy to look at, especially with social media, obviously. But also, if you're just feeling a bit isolated, if you're feeling a bit low, to look at others and think they're doing it better than me, or I'm like, therefore I'm failing. And, I think that's one reason, and I know we're going to come on to talk more about compassion, but that's one reason that I think like having a sense of self-compassion is really important, because you can really acknowledge or understand that you're not the only one that feels that way. Like, if you tell me that, I'm like, yeah, I feel like that all the time too. I see my friends like, doing different things, achieving in different ways, and I think, oh my, I'm so behind. I'm not doing the things that I should be doing. I should be this, I should be that. So easy to get into that trap in your mind, and it's so draining, isn't it? It's so draining to get those feelings.
Yeah, it is. And for me, it was a weird one because, I mentioned before that I'd moved out before we started recording, that I've moved out to Madrid, and that kind of came about through a point of reflection whereby just before we were finishing our studies, we were all kind of, there's this massive surge to apply for the undergraduate kind of roles that were coming up and even though all of my obviously uni mates had all studied Spanish and I studied Spanish and business, so we're all kind of very languages based. We were all like, a lot of us were applying to like, the McKinseys and all this type of stuff. And I was like feeling the pressure. I was like, oh my God, I need to get this application off because it's going to close tomorrow. And then I was like, but I actually want them to turn me down. Like, I don't want to be accepted. And then I just sat there in my in the student living room. I was just like, what am I doing? Like, why am I sending applications that I then want to actively get rejected? Like, it just seems ridiculous. And then that's when I was like, look, I don't want to live in London. Like, I don't want to do this. I want to move to Madrid. But even then, having moved to Madrid, I still find myself, if I'm not careful, like falling back into the trap of, oh shit, but I'm on 27 grand and my mate's on 40 grand. And I'm not even like putting into the, the cost of like what Madrid living is compared to London living, etc. I'm seeing like, oh, this is that, and he's got enough money to put a deposit down on a house. I can't even like dream of that in the next 10 years. And then it just falls into this cycle, and you're like, fuck, like these were people that like at the age of 18 to 21 I was on a par with, and then when you kind of do this like stupid maths, you're like, oh my God, I'm like way behind now. What's happened? And then, like I said, it takes you another like moment of reflection to go, listen, they're in their lane doing what they want to do, and that's great. And obviously, like, kudos to them and celebrate their achievements as they're your friends, but like it has nothing to do with what you're doing. But it does take a point just like to pull yourself out and be like, Jesus, like calm. And also just to, just talking about self-compassion, but to kind of recognize the things that you've achieved. And like, because friends say to me, like, oh yeah, but you've moved abroad, and like, I'm still sharing with my flatmates in London, and you and your girlfriend have got your own flat and you've got a dog. And I'm like, yeah, but that's just like, to me, it's just like, oh, yeah, that's just life. But to them, obviously, because they're comparing it the other way, they're like, oh, that's a massive achievement that you've done that they haven't done. Do you know what I mean? It's like you get caught in this like futility of comparison, and it's just the worst.
Yeah. So well put, the futility of comparison. They say comparison is the thief of joy, and they don't say that for no reason. It really it's a bit of a trap. But to link back to what we were saying earlier, it's like very much about the societal values that are pushed upon us. Like, have you got a job? Are you earning enough? Have you got a house? Are you in a steady relationship? Are you settled down? You like your life is some kind of tick box or something that you have to then like compare with other people, which is just like not helpful or supportive at all for anyone. And actually, I find there's some research done by a guy called Tim Kasser, who talks about the difference between intrinsic and extrinsic values. And he talks about extrinsic values are things like status and money and income, and that we're kind of taught to focus on them. How do I look to the outside world? But actually, like, research has shown, what really makes us happy is like intrinsic values. So things that we deeply care about, our relationships, but also like our own passions, our own sense of meaning that comes from the inside out. And I think, we're not taught that. So like, we're constantly pushed these like external, extrinsic like values, and that's what you kind of then end up judging yourself on, just because it's what's around you and what's constantly promoted. But actually, if you kind of get the chance to like take a step back and get supported in looking at, or even just support yourself in just looking at like what really matters to me, actually, like what's really making me happy. And like, that's really striking what you say about like trying to apply for that course and then not even wanting to get on, like what, like, and then just observing, okay, what moments do make me happy. And often it's like those smaller things that you wouldn't necessarily shout about, but that just do really mean a lot to you, so I think that's important.
I think the culture like breeds off in insecurity, the culture is trying to go, oh, you sure about that thing? Well, look at this thing. And because you can't make a lot of money off someone who's pretty secure in their intrinsic values. You can't,
sure.
Like you said, you can't make money off someone who just prefers to go to the forest and the pub at the weekend. Maybe he'll buy boots every few years, or but then you have to then we can so easily all fall into that kind of, we're all subject to that. Like, there's no getting away from it unless you buy a cabin in the woods. They kind of gone, oh, well, you sure about that thing? Because here's the opposite, and it's looking a lot better. And like Seb was saying, it's like that fight, like the internal experience. You have to trust that. I think we have to trust that. And I almost feel, not to sound overtly conspiratorial, but so much is going, oh, your experience, but look at this, but look at this. Whereas what Seb was talking about, what you were talking about, it's like this sense, all right, well, this is what I'm feeling, so I have to trust this. It's the closest thing I have.
And it's not, in a way, it's increasingly like, it looks less conspiracy theory if it's like backed up by a lot of research, that actually these are the things that make us more happy. But we can see that, it's beneficial to certain aspects of society to keep us insecure, to keep us as kind of model consumers, like, it's not, if you felt just completely happy and contented with your walk in the woods and your social connections, then you wouldn't necessarily be having that kind of constant need to consume more and more for your sense of meaning, purpose, and status. You would, of course, there's certain things that we need to consume, but like the level of consumption that we have in society at the moment, to meet kind of to fulfill our like needs that can be fulfilled in other much more meaningful ways, has just got a bit out of control, I'd say.
For the intro into compassion, would you mind giving us your definition, or a generally agreed upon definition, so we all know what we're working with?
Sure. So compassion is a sense of feeling with others, but also kind of importantly wanting to kind of relieve another's suffering. So while empathy is that kind of genuine sense of sharing another's emotional state, compassion is moving beyond that into kind of wishing and or acting towards relieving that other's suffering.
Like trying to acknowledge your own suffering, reduce that suffering, and trying to acknowledge other people's suffering and reduce their suffering.
Exactly. Yeah, and I find self-compassion is such a helpful way into the topic of compassion more broadly. So there's an American researcher who I really love called Kristin Neff, who does a lot of work on self-compassion, and she breaks it down into like 3 really easy, accessible steps, which starts with kind of just mindfulness of So when you have an experience of suffering in yourself, just a kind of mindfulness of that suffering. And by that, she kind of describes not pushing it away. You know, it's so easy when we feel that sense of sadness or overwhelm or whatever the feeling of suffering might be, anxiety, that we just want to run from it, or, you know, repress it, or, you know, buy something to make us feel better. But actually, if we can just, you know, learn to be mindful and sit with that feeling of suffering, that's the first step in self-compassion. The second step is recognizing that this is actually a shared experience, like recognizing our common humanity. So knowing that if you are feeling like we're talking about now, that you're feeling, you know, ashamed because you don't feel like you're measuring up to a certain ideal or whatever. When you're in that, when you get stuck in that thought process, it's so easy to feel like I'm the only one feeling this way, and how could anyone, like, you know, what's wrong with me kind of vibe. But like you say, Seb, like your friends feeling the exact same thing, like comparing themselves to you. So like recognizing that common humanity is the second step of self-compassion. And then the third step is loving kindness. So really practicing like kind words to yourself, but with a genuineness. So not like a false sense of positivity, but like any small like act of work, either act, gesture, like just putting a hand on your heart, or just like gently slowing down, or like trying to just say to yourself, like, you're okay, you're doing the best you can. Like, you know, any kind of small, gentle words like that. So in those 3 steps, like putting those 3 steps into practice can be really transformative, actually, because it just helps you to see your own suffering in a new way, and try to then like transform that suffering, but not with you don't go into the process it's kind of a delicate thing, because you don't go into the process like wanting to push your suffering away, like I say, but being with your suffering in a different way, and through that process often your suffering can transform.
And Flo, do you find that because you mentioned that there are 2 parts, there's like the self compassion, and then there's the compassion towards your friends and loved ones, where you're trying to like help them resolve their issues. Do you find that some people are maybe better at one than the other? I think Jim would probably say that I'm maybe better with other people, so I've maybe got the outer compassion towards friends and loved ones, but not so good at self-compassion. Do you find that that's like a common thing, and people trying to come into you with those problems?
Yeah, definitely. That like I think a lot of people have that kind of outer focus and can be really kind to their friends and people in their lives, and actually find that their own inner world or inner voice is actually a lot more critical. So often in self-compassion training, it's about trying to see yourself as a good friend. So like how, you know, when you make a mistake at work, for example, and you're like, you know, you could be like, oh my God, how could I have done it? Oh, I'm terrible. Like, why am I like this? But if you could, you know, imagine if your friend was going through the same experience, what would you say to them? Like, would you know, imagine saying the same things like you say to yourself to a friend, you just wouldn't do it. So like bringing that sense of awareness and like trying to become a compassionate friend to yourself is something that's really important, especially for those people that are, and I'm like that as well, for sure, like more likely to like look at others around and check in on others, but that actually can be quite bad at like checking in on yourself, basically, like giving yourself that time.
Like,
and
is
attention.
it a defense mechanism?
This is going to sound terrible, given that like we're 80 podcasts in. Yeah, it's going to sound terrible, like we're 80 episodes into a podcast of mental health podcast that I'm a host of, but like I just find this is just purely myself, okay? This is not to say that anyone needs to think this way. I know it's probably the wrong way to think, but like the 2 reasons that I find self-compassion hard, because like Jim's always like, oh man, you need to be like more compassionate to yourself, you need to be a bit more like kinder with yourself, whatever. But the 2 reasons I find it hard is, number one, and I don't know if this is a British thing or I don't know, but I find it really self-indulgent, like I'm just like a bit icky. That feeling like, like don't give yourself praise type thing. That's not your job. Let others kind of give you praise, but that's not your thing to do. And then the other thing, maybe more seriously, is that like in my head, it's like I need to hold myself to a higher set of values and standards. And that's not like, I don't mean economically speaking, or I need to be successful in my job, just in terms of like with my relationships that I have, and those types of things. And personally, I need to hold myself to a higher set of standards than I would expect of my friends, but I do so kind of like for them in a way so that I can be the best friend I can for that person, if that makes sense. So it's like,
Yeah,
I know people say, oh yeah, but you wouldn't speak to your friend like that. It's like, yeah, but I don't expect them to hold themselves to my standard. That's like, my standards, what I've created for myself, not for anyone else to live with. So then it's like, that's why I'm like harsh on myself, because it's like, these are things that I've like, values and principles that I want to base myself off. And if I'm not reaching them, then that means I'm not being the friend that I expect him to be. I'm not being the boyfriend I'm expecting to be. I'm not being the son that I expect to be. And that's when it like, do you know what I mean? So I feel like I'm doing it almost in service of others in a weird way. I don't know how to explain it, but yeah.
I do. I get exactly what you mean, Seb, and it's really interesting. It's almost, in a way, it's a bit of a trick that we play on ourselves, I would say, and I relate to you exactly, because I do the same thing. But actually, what the research shows is the more that we can be self-compassionate with ourselves. People get scared, like, oh, if I'm just like soft with myself, then I'm not going to achieve anything, and then I'll just like let everything go and I won't be kind to anyone. Actually, what's been shown is the more that we can bring that kind of kindness to ourselves, it's like you fill your own cup, and then you kind of are more capable to give to others in your life, to achieve the things that you want to achieve, because you are taking care of yourself, because you are bringing that compassionate attitude towards yourself. And I've done this myself many times, if you try and like just constantly give and like push, then you can find yourself in a state where you're overwhelmed, where you feel really empty and you feel quite lost. And you find it hard to like then generate that gentleness with yourself, like you're saying. And I definitely can understand that. And that's why I say, like, I think it's important that any practice you do like feels genuine for you. It's not like, oh, this, but I would say, like, be open to kind of trying those in a way that feels genuine and authentic to you. Be open to trying it, because it can then help you to be a better friend, to be a better partner, to be a better, person, I think.
Yeah. And do you find as well that people find it self-indulgent, or like they come to you with the idea of like, that is not, like, it's not for me to be compassionate to myself, let others do that. Like, that's,
for
my
sure.
virtues, I'm not going to start doing that stuff.
Oh yeah, definitely. Like, people, I mean, I think there's a kind of cultural attitude, and it's interesting, like, where does it come from? But like, that we need to kind of push ourselves, and that we improve through harsh criticism and struggle, and we internalize that attitude, and kind of shout at ourselves internally sometimes, that we have to be doing things a certain way, living a certain way, and to some extent that can get results, but to some extent, and I think that it can also have like consequences for our mental health, basically. And I think that that's really important to acknowledge and find ways to deal with that feel right for you.
Yeah, Flo, the what I've found in my last few years is the more I can give sincere compassion to myself, the more, this isn't in contradiction to say, because I know, like, it's not whether it's true or not, but what context is true and what context is not true. So for me, I found that, like, the more compassion I can have for myself genuinely, the more I can give compassion to other people genuinely. Because I think there's a societal expectation going, like, oh, you gotta be kind to this particular cause or this particular group of people, and sometimes it's not genuine, because it's more like of a learned thing. It's not like a deep sense of, I really have compassion for that person or that group of people or that struggle, or and why I came across your workshop about like compassion as activism. And you know, a lot of people will be like, oh, here we go, like someone taking something like esoteric and trying to make it, you know, more on the ground, like revolutionary. But so many times in my life, and like with people I love, and there's no judgment here, but you're like, there's a position where like there's a lack of compassion for a particular person or a group. And here, look at the media we consume. Lack of compassion for someone who doesn't hold the opinion that we hold, or has had a different background that we have had, and so they look at the world a little differently. It is radical to say, I don't want to slander them. I don't know what they've been through. I don't want to take the easy hit and say, yeah, they are cowboys, they are silly, they are uneducated, they are, you know, put in any word you want, pejorative term you want to put in. And I really believe it's radical, because everyone is just going, go on, just say the other side are wrong. Just, you know, just say that. Just say that he shouldn't have done that and he was wrong. And why I invited you on is because I'd love for you to speak more on this. Just how radical it is, because if you can just watch your daily actions or daily interactions with people, how many times do people set you up for the judgment? They're like literally just going, giving it to you on a platter. Go on, judge them. Judge that guy there, will you?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think we live now in like such a polarized, like judgmental society in a lot of ways, like in a kind of, divisive society that's got a kind of us and them narrative going on in so many different ways, you know, about like if you believe this, then you're right, and if you don't, then you're wrong, and you've got to say like they're ridiculous, otherwise like you're not in this group or that group. And I think that, you know, what compassion brings to the table in this like dialogue is, well, being open to your own like reactions, so your genuine reactions. I like what you say, Jim, about like, you know, there's the level of like how I'm supposed to feel, how I'm supposed to be responding, how I'm supposed to be thinking, that often people just kind of like switch into autopilot and just get stuck there and don't kind of critically analyze. But what's your genuine, like, you know, feeling, thought process around a certain topic? And you know, I find like having a mindfulness practice and having compassion like can give a bit of space for that, basically. And that's not all like fluffy rainbows and clouds, you know. It's that can bring up a lot of like dark, nasty feelings like anger, like, you know, confusion, rage, like frustration, all of these things, which are, you know, aren't wrong. These, like, the thing is, those feelings aren't wrong in the society we live in today. You know, there are big challenges facing us, and it's important to look those in the face and be aware of them. But I think that if we get into the trap of like narrowing down and just like blaming specific individuals rather than looking at the structures of the systems within which we're living, then we're not on the path to like a kind of genuine wider sense of change. We're just getting stuck in a kind of cycle of it might feel like good in the moment, you know, and of course, you know, no one's immune to this. It might feel good in the moment to say, yeah, like they're stupid and wrong, and therefore like raise yourself up. But actually that's not creating a space where we can have more open dialogues, more chance for the potential for understanding different perspectives, and for like eventually being able to shift things. So I think, you know, mindfulness and compassion, and for me, like having a mindfulness, I see mindfulness and compassion as really interrelated, you know. So like kind of like two sides of the same coin. Having that kind of practice can give you the space to acknowledge what your genuine reactions are, but also then have more space to hold another's perspective. And that's not to say that you need to be soft and light and accepting of everything, but at least you can come from a more genuine and open position in the way that you engage.
I like that.
I think I don't know if you guys would agree, but maybe what I think one of the issues might be that sometimes it feels like if you're on a certain side of the argument, it might feel like you're always trying to be compassionate towards the other side, and the other side is just belligerently kind of like just shouting their views across, and it's not like compassion on both sides. And so then it becomes a point where it's just like, oh, you know what? Like I'm tired of trying to be the good guy. I'm tired of trying to be the one to understand the incomprehensible. And you know what? Like this, I can't. Like last year I tried to. I'm not like some sort of white knight. Don't get me wrong at all. And in fact, I do want to talk to you because I feel like I'm becoming more and more entrenched in some views. But like at the start of the year, I tried to be like, listen, you know what? Let's not just call a spade a spade. Let's try to get like understanding and like try to have these compassionate, you know, really like conversations rather than just being like, you're this and blah, blah, because that's not going to change anyone anyway. And that all it does is it just like entrenches them further in whatever they believe. So like an example was like when the whole George Floyd movement was happening, like there was some guy on Facebook, wasn't even, he's like a friend of a friend, that was like commenting like just racist bile on Facebook, and everyone was then commenting underneath being like, oh, you're a racist cunt and this, that and the other, and you could tell he was almost getting kicks out of it. Like he was like, that's the attention that he wanted, you know. So I don't know the guy, but I reached out to him and we had like over a week like this like conversation of like why I think potentially, even though I can maybe try to understand where he's coming from, why his views may be hurtful towards people and this, that and the other and yada yada. And like by the end of it, it was so draining for me to try and like be compassionate and try to understand like just openly racist views. And then like for him there was no like, he was never saying it the other way around. He was never like, oh, I could see why you think the like imperialism is bad, but he wasn't like, it was just like, nah mate, this is how it is, this is why this is why white people are better, and yada, yada. It's like, oh, and by the end of it I was like, what am I doing? Like I'm not going to change the lad. I'm not going to call him a racist prick or anything because that's not going to get anything further. But I was like, why have I even tried? Like I just like, and then I started finding myself over like obviously what's happened with the UK politically and stuff. You find yourself like really seeing it as like an us v them thing, which I hate. And we always try to say on the podcast like not to do that. But I'll be honest, I have caught myself in that thing of like, oh, how did you idiots vote for Boris? And how did you vote for Brexit? And oh my God, are you serious? Like, and like, you know, I said that I listened to the James O'Brien LBC, which probably gives away like my political persuasion. But he always says compassion for the conned, contempt for the con men. And I think like it's a great thing to try and live by. But I think it's really, really hard to like, actually, as Jim would say, genuinely implement that. Because it's all well and good to say like, oh, I can see when they come from this, but when people are saying things that you find like deeply offensive or whatever it may be, to really try and have true compassion for these people, it can be so draining, I find anyway. And then you get caught in this thing of like you said, it's an us v them. It's like really just kind of tribal, when actually you maybe came into it with good intentions, but it just wears you down.
But, sorry, not to put in.
Yeah, definitely.
But this is why I want to ask Flo about practice, because you know people say, "Oh yeah, I'm trying to be compassionate. It was really hard. Yeah, I just can't look at Nigel Farage and say like I'll give him a hug or whatever." But that's because compassion is like a muscle that you have to build. You know, it's not like some people are just, you know, the Dalai Lama and they can just like hug everybody and there's no intention to change someone's mind. There's just going, I see another human there, another soul. I'm trying to give them the best right now. It's a practice. And I think that's why I want to talk to you about, like, I want to allocate significant time to this because it's super hard. I remember years ago, I would be judging people so much. But like from a position of, and I'm sure the other people had that position of, I'm just trying to tell them the right way to look at it. You know, I'm just trying to tell them like this and this. But when you can consistently, and this is where I think it comes back to, like, I just think self-compassion and outward compassion are just so interrelated, where if you sit with yourself like consistently months over years, you'll just say, oh yeah, I had that negative thought there. Oh, something came up there where I judged that person like in a vile way, like Seb was talking about. You know, sometimes you look people and all of a sudden you think that thing and you're, oh my God. But if you have the compassion for yourself, you just go, that's the nature of the mind sometimes. The mind is a product of its environment. The environment is quite toxic. So you can kind of let that go, and you have the ability to know that you are not the mind. you are something deeper than your thoughts. And so you can, and then you can look at someone who's probably had a similar thought to you. You know, that group of people are like, oh, they're scumbags, they're this and this. And then you go, oh, okay, because there's a part of me in that person. You know, maybe I'm not doing what they're doing, but there's a part of me who has felt strongly as they felt. And I think that's where it comes from. Then it's genuine. And then, so it's like, how do we build that flow? I don't want to act like I have it perfectly, but like for people who are going, yeah, Jim, yeah, I like it, but I'd like to see you when you're in this environment, or I'd like to see you when you're in that environment.
Well, first of all, love the question, and I'm not going to pretend I have the whole answer, because obviously this is like a huge like philosophical dilemma, like, you know, throughout the ages, you know, like, how do you have that sense of like acceptance and love for people, you know, people that are strongly other than you. But there's a few things. I mean, it's like, I love hearing you guys share your own experiences in relation to this. I guess in response to Seb, I would say compassion isn't only about being soft and gentle and understanding and open. It's also like there's a Kristin Neff, the researcher I mentioned earlier, her latest book is about fierce compassion. So it's about like the fire in your belly, the strength to say no when you think something's not right. That is also compassion. You're actually showing in your original act of like commenting on that Facebook post, you were showing like, this is not okay, and I'm drawing a boundary and a line here. And then you engaged in dialogue, but then you've also got the right to set your boundary within that dialogue and say, you know what, things aren't changing here. I'm going to have compassion for myself. I'm going to put my energy where change is possible, you know, and, you know, stop this discussion now. And who's not to say that you haven't laid some kind of shoots of green shoots or seeds of change for that, you know, the person that you had the discussion with. But there's no need, I wouldn't say that a compassion practice requires you to pour your energy, your precious life energy down like an endless, you know, hole of someone who's just not going to change their views. But I would say, you know, that compassion does sometimes require us to say no, like whether that's to say no when we don't agree with something that's going on in wider society, to say no to the way that people are, you know, expressing themselves if you feel it's disrespectful to you or others around you, and to try and approach that in openness, but also to say no if that dialogue isn't going anywhere. And I'd say in relation to, you know, this question of what you said about James O'Brien and his perspective of the way that you know, look at people that have been wronged or the people that are doing the wrong. I'd say I like this phrase, like hate the sin but not the sinner, you know. So you can feel that anger and indignation against someone's actions, against like how these actions are playing into kind of wider systemic issues. That's not to say that person necessarily is like evil or wrong or stupid, or, you know, you can disagree with the action, with, you know, with the outcome of that. And then in terms of what you're saying, Jim, about practice, so I originally started practicing mindfulness and compassion through a kind of Buddhist practice in a way, through the Zen Buddhist teacher Thich Nhat Hanh, who really talks about engaged Buddhism. So not just Buddhism as an inner practice, but how that then fuels us to engage in the wider world. And, you know, in Buddhism, there's a metta practice of compassion, and that's a training of the mind where you, you know, repeat compassion phrases, loving phrases towards yourself. And they're things like, may you be happy, may you be healthy, may you live at ease. You direct those towards yourself, towards a close loved one, towards someone that's kind of neutral to you, and then towards someone who you actually, you know, have real challenges with. and that is a kind of established part of like metta is an established part of Buddhist practice, and indeed that is about building up that muscle of compassion, being able to, even if, and again going back to the, you know, hate the sin not the sinner, even if you really are like devastated by someone's actions, is it possible to you know, see the person within that and still wish them well, even if that means at a distance and kind of putting your boundary up and cutting yourself off from them? That is hard. That's not you know, you know, that's the practice, and honestly it's a lifelong journey. I've been practicing that for like 6 or 7 years or something, and I definitely like only barely scratching the surface. So you know, I think yeah, I think it's but I do find that, you know, that it brings me something, like you said, Jim, about the more that you can practice that, the more that you notice it can have an impact on your life. So it's kind of iterative, it builds up. So yeah, it can sound quite theoretical and maybe a bit wishy-washy when you haven't tried it, but in the experience of doing it yourself, you can notice you know, those shifts of transformation. And why I'm really interested in the link between compassion and activism is because it doesn't seem to fit together. You know, people assume like compassion is like just accepting everyone, and it's actually, you know, like I say, there's this sense that actually, you know, it's about accepting our interconnection with every, you know, every other person and every living being on this earth, and still within that being able to, you know, take action and you know, work towards a more hopeful future. So yeah, it's kind of, it can feel quite paradoxical at times, and yet it's so powerful when you get in the sweet spot of that balance.
Totally. I'm currently writing this piece I mentioned before on the vision and compassion, and what I just see is the danger of dehumanization. So instead of an enemy of yours, right, someone you the opinion that you oppose vehemently, instead of seeing that as an opportunity to dehumanize that person, can you see that as an opportunity? All right, here's the test. You know, you're learning a language. There's times where you have to show what you've been practicing. All right, here's the test. Like, do I dehumanize the person as a lot of people around me are doing, or do I take it going, okay, I'm strongly disagreeing with you. There's no way I'm agreeing with you, but I'm not treading those waters of dehumanization, because after dehumanization, what would you do to that person then? And then I just think it gets very, very, as Seb and myself would say, it gets squirrely. And it gets squirrely. And that's my deep wish for this podcast, is for people to just, let's say, like, the dehumanization of people is really dangerous, and it's very palpable. You can feel it. People are really, you know, calling people like animals, like comparing people to animals, and once you go there, what's the next stop? That's what I feel. So I think what you're speaking about with compassion is just it. I mean, look at Martin Luther King as well. He was hardcore activist, but that man had a lot of compassion, you know. And I don't think he ever dehumanized the white people that were throwing God's name at him, you know, and killing his people, you know.
I think it's really important as well to look at power structures. So it's really easy to, dehuman. Like, actually, often the people with the most power benefit from that dehumanization process the most. So actually, it's like the classic divide and conquer kind of mindset, isn't it? And if you look at to give a very modern example, you look at the way like the kind of mainstream media in the UK can dehumanize immigrants and refugees, and then that can then justify, like horrendous policies of exclusion and terrible treatment of those people, of people in those vulnerable positions, I mean. And I think that in that case, it's like, who's got the power here? Who's benefiting from this narrative of dehumanization? And how can I challenge that? Rather than getting caught in, this like divisive rhetoric that's all about kind of just keeping us a bit submissive, because if you're just fighting people with either the same or less power than you the whole time, rather than kind of coming together to look at the structures that are kind of controlling things, then you're kind of more malleable and controllable by the powers that be. That might sound a bit conspiracy theorist, but I do really genuinely think that that's how governments and corporations try to keep us a little bit kind of more controllable, basically.
Yeah. I mean, I even think from the media
brought
point
me
of
back
view.
to-
Sorry, Seb.
Sorry, Jim. No, go on.
I was just going to say, even from the media point of view, when was the last time you read an article that just said, "Hey guys, it's been tough for really everyone," and I think we all got to, look after ourselves first and foremost, look after our families, but also remember that there are people really struggling, and when people are really struggling, they resort to certain things, and people are not their opinions, and people are not their actions. Condemn the action, but they're still people at the end of the day. Like that article isn't going to go viral. But what is going to go viral is, hey, you see that opinion that's opposite to yours, or see that group of people that are thinking, oh, here's another example of them just being wild or being stupid or being ignorant. And then that's what you were saying. Like, you talk about the things that are controlling us, talk about the algorithms that are just pitched to going, all right, let's, like, that guy is getting riled up here, we better send him more of that. And I've just seen so many good-hearted, good-natured people really dehumanize some other people. And I can't help but think that is almost a direct result of the media being pitched to them, And like you said, that to have that awareness, to take the step back on, right, what's really going on here? Who's benefiting from the fact that I now want to punch this guy's head in that I've never met?
Yeah, well, we live in a time when we have such a thing as the attention economy. So essentially, our attention is valuable, and in order to grab little bits of our attention, the media tries to make things more and more kind of sensationalist, like emotive, to get people really riled up, like you say, because it's like it's clickbait, isn't it? But and then that's monetized. So that whole socio-economic model that's been kind of imposed. I feel like we're in a giant social experiment in that way. So that is, I think that takes some strength of mind to step out of sometimes, in really simple ways. Like, for me, I've just decided not to I never take my phone into my bedroom, for example, and never look at a screen just before I go to bed at night, just so that in that time, my attention is my own, And if I can, I try. I mean, I've got a young daughter, so it doesn't always work out. But if I can, I try and sit and do a bit of a practice in the morning. Again, just to reclaim my attention and intentionally set a way that you would like to be, in the day with other people. Really give yourself time to feel what's coming up for you. Because what we often do is just go. It's so rapid, we just go from one thing to another. We're encouraged to just go, consume, read, click, and again, that's a way to kind of disempower us, because our attention is so fragmented that we're not able to kind of to focus, to commit, to really deepen any sense of self, any sense of action in the world. So I think, be like giving yourself practices that can help you carve out some space within that you don't kind of constantly get dragged in all these different directions that so many people want to take you in is really important.
Flo, before we ask you about, I mean, you've given us a few there, but some of the practice that you do to keep on top of your mental health, just to bring it back full circle, it kind of it hit me whilst you and Jim were talking there that, like, even though I do agree with you that, you know, we've got all these kind of external forces that are almost pitting us against each other for their, you know, for their greater good, not for our greater good. But it kind of strikes me that only can succeed when, you know, the majority of the population at large are kind of have some sort of intrinsic unhappiness. And then that's when you kind of look for the enemy, or you look for something to blame as to why. Because, you know, I was talking to Jim before, and stupidly, I kind of jokingly but semi-seriously would always say that, like, couldn't wait until I met like a horrible Irish person, because every one of Jim's mates were just all like salt of the earth people, and I was like, it can't be that you're all this nice. Like, there has to be someone who breaks the rule, and when that day comes, I'll be a happy person, right? Unfortunately, that day did actually come over Christmas period, and I wasn't a happy person. It shattered my illusions into smithereens. But anyway, when I was talking to this, you know, a housemate of one of my friends, and unfortunately, he was this Irish guy, and he wasn't saying some very nice stuff, and it was the first time I'd come across it. So I had to text Jim. I was like, "Oh man, my illusions have been shattered." But anyway, once I then, yeah, and Jim was like, "Oh man, I told you it happened sooner or later." In fairness, but once I spoken to my friend, and I was like, "Man, what was up with your flatmate? Like, why is he saying like that type of stuff?" Because I wasn't going to get involved. I don't know the guy well enough to even try to have a debate or conversation. So I was just sitting there for once, quietly drinking my drink. And then basically it transpired that he wasn't very happy within himself. Like, that's basically what it came down to. And so then that's why when he would get drunk, these certain like things or tropes would come out. And I was like, oh, that's interesting that, like, you know, when he's like sober and whatever, can kind of keep it all in. He's like this really happy-go-lucky guy, whatever, maybe like the stereotype of like an Irish guy. But then the minute he was drunk, like these things were coming out that weren't very nice to hear. And I was like, see, I think that's the problem, is that like a lot of us, we're unhappy, like we were saying at the start, with our jobs, our careers, the direction of our lives. We think that we're losers because we're comparing it to like these standards that we see in, you know, Netflix series or whatever it may be. And then with that unhappiness, they're kind of able, whether it's Facebook, whether it's the media, and all this stuff, they're kind of able to like almost like navigate that hate towards, rather than like inward, to push that inward hate like outward and be like, oh, the reason I'm unhappy is because there's immigrants, or the reason I'm happy is because there's gay people, or whatever that your thing is. And then like, whereas if we were kind of, you know, a bit more all like Christopher Boyce, wouldn't that be a lovely world? Then like, then maybe like they wouldn't have that success rate, if you know what I mean. And things that are deemed clickbaity, like I somehow doubt that Chris is clicking on that type of stuff. Even if it came on his feed, he'd probably just be like, he'd just dismiss it straight away, you know? Yeah. So I don't know. I just thought like when you guys were talking, it kind of like brought it back full circle for me.
Yeah, no, I think that's really well said. And I think it's, it's like what we were saying about that kind of like, if you don't, it starts from within you, and how you engage with the world. And we're told it's the other way around. So we need to kind of flip things on their head a little bit and go back to the basics within us. And that's, to be honest, that's why I also like wanted to work in wellbeing, because it's about looking at like, what are the solutions. So I feel like, yes, we're facing a lot of challenges in the world today. Yes, we need to make changes in the way that we're living kind of individually, because we're facing so many, like, you know, increasing levels of mental health challenges generally. People just aren't happy, aren't doing well. And societally, you know, we're going in the wrong direction. It's not sustainably. So like, what's going on? And it's very easy to get like overwhelmed and lost in the problems. And yet, like, what does a good, happy person look like, for example? And that, you know, just looking at the research from positive psychology, you know, it's our relationships, it's our like connection to nature. It's our sense of meaning and purpose in our lives. It's very kind of grounded, simple, like things that we can connect with in ourselves. And it doesn't, and there's so much that's, gets in the way of that, because we're, there's so many things that we're told that are much more important than those things that kind of drag us in all these different directions. So yeah, I think what you're saying, like if someone's unhappy on an individual level, they can kind of, like, if they're not aware of like that happening, they can kind of lash out or direct that at others. And yeah, we can do that kind of at a kind of collective level as well, like, the fact that we're struggling must be the fault of this group of people, rather than kind of thinking about, again, the way that things are structured, and like, how can we get enough time to be with our loved ones? How can we make sure that we're not like working 80-hour weeks so that we can get time to just like think and breathe and eat properly, and all of these like really simple things, that are made like inaccessible to a lot of people just through the way that society is structured. And that's just upside down, basically.
I'm going to try and combine these two things that have been popping up in my head for the last few minutes. And one of them is the Buddhist idea of knowing suffering. We've had a former guest on 3 times, Adam Starr. He's a good friend of ours. He's always given us Buddhist wisdom.
The podcast guru.
But Buddha is often misquoted to say life is suffering, when really, if you ask most Buddhists, they say no. He said no suffering, as in know what suffering is like, and acknowledge when you're at part, when you are contributing to your own suffering, and when it's the inevitable here, life is suffering sometimes, like you can't avoid it. But if you have the ability to know when you're like with your free will going in for some suffering, then you have the ability to go, well, why am I doing this? I don't have to do this. I don't enjoy when I do this. And I think that's crucial. And I think Seb is 100% right. That's in my opinion, that's a huge variable as to why people are like have an inclination towards going on to some sites that are, spewing a bit of hatred or like dehumanization of other groups. But I also like, there's this woman, I don't know if you heard of Anna Lemke. She does work around addiction, and she's talking about how there are several people, or there's a section of population that fall into addiction and fall into certain behavior as a result of pain and trauma, like Seb was talking about. But there's also a section of population that are happily married and like their job and are quite healthy, and because of the way certain aspects of society are pitched to us, we kind of fall into it. And so, like, while I agree with Seb 100%, that's a variable. There's other people that that are content, and they just go on their smartphone, they find one video, they find another video, they find one article, they find another article, and all of a sudden maybe the mini addiction that they already have towards their iPhone, towards a bit of distraction, the dopamine hit that we get from that, is exacerbated when we go, oh yeah, I get like a little rush when I read that article, when I read, and if you don't have that ability to say, whoa, when I read that article, I feel really angry, and I didn't 5 minutes ago, and I didn't have to read that article. Why am I just inflicting suffering on myself? I think, and so like Seb made a joke about Christopher, among like several of my friends who would describe like one of the happiest of my friends, they're away from the phone whenever they can be, sincerely, like to the point where sometimes it's really hard to contact them. You won't be able to contact them, and some people say, oh, that's selfish, or this and that, I need to be able to reach it just in case. But I can safely say that a lot of the happiest people I know have, like you said, clear boundaries of going, here, I know when I can do this, and I know when I can't do this. And I think we need to get better at that.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's so much in what you said, and I think boundaries are vital. I think what you say about like suffering is really interesting, because I think in Buddhism they also talk about the second arrow of suffering. So the first arrow, like if we get hit by an arrow, the first arrow is the pain itself. So yeah, there is some pain inevitable in life. We're all going to die. That's one inevitable, that we're going to lose people. There is some suffering inevitable in life. But the second arrow is the way that we then kind of interpret and like run over that suffering, and kind of ingest that suffering into our system. So I think that's really a helpful analogy for me from Buddhism to kind of understand how we can, yes, of course there's suffering in it, and that deserves attention and compassion, and we shouldn't deny it, and yet we don't need to kind of exacerbate it and make it worse by the way that we treat ourselves, the way that we talk to ourselves, the way that we are with ourselves. So and I think in relation to the point about the news and the phone, I do think, setting boundaries and knowing where you want to put your attention. And I think it's important to say that doesn't mean shutting off the world or not being aware of the challenges that we face in the wider world. I definitely wouldn't want to say let's all go and live in a cabin in the woods, like you said, although I'm sure that's really nice for some people, but let's be aware of, the challenges that we're facing, but let's be aware in a conscious way, in a way that we have some control and awareness over how we're directing our attention and our actions. So I really like the work of some thinkers called Joanna Macy and Chris Johnston. They wrote a book called Active Hope that was all about how hope isn't something that is kind of just like passive or something like wishful thinking. It's actually being fully aware of the circumstances that we face, but choosing to take even a small action in the face of the challenges we face. So if you do read a news article that upsets you, looking at why is that upsetting you, what's going on there, is there anything you can do, maybe even if it's just have a conversation about that with someone else, even if it's just make a small donation, or maybe it's something bigger than that. Maybe you want to get involved in a political campaign, see what other actions are going on around that issue, but not seeing yourself as kind of a passive consumer or victim just with things happening to you, but seeing yourself as an agent within the story of the world that's going on, and reclaiming your own attention, your own power to act within that as well.
Flo, I know it's an hour and 10 minutes, but it's just so fun to have you on. So I might have a question or two more.
Sure, yeah, go for it.
Compassion fatigue. I think Seb touched on it a little bit when he had that interaction with the guy on Facebook, I think it was, where Seb is hearing what he has to say and then realizing the compassion is not being reciprocated, and Seb's trying to give some more compassion, but again, not reciprocated. Like you said, you're almost like emptying your tank. I'd love to know if you've come across some interesting research on compassion fatigue, or how do we acknowledge when we have compassion fatigue? Some people who work in social care, some people who work with homeless people, some people who work in certain hostile environments that require, like nurses, require a lot of compassion, but there's only so much compassion one can have.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Well, actually, it's really interesting research on this, because a woman called Tanya Singer, who's a German psychologist, she has done a lot of research on the difference between compassion and empathy.
Okay.
And she says that compassion fatigue is, in a way, a bit of a misnomer, that it's actually empathy fatigue. And the difference being that with empathy, we're taking on another's emotional state. So if you're a nurse or a social worker, you're in a caring profession, and you're constantly feeling with the other, so taking on their emotional state as your own, actually that can, in a positive way, that can be a doorway to compassion, but in a negative way, that can actually be very dangerous for your own state, because they, Tanya Singer's research team, they did brain scans, and if you're kind of empathetic to suffering, you're the same areas of your brain lighting up as if you were experiencing the suffering yourself directly. So what she talks about is needing to move from empathy and the risk of empathy fatigue towards compassion. And the difference is, with compassion, you don't take on the emotion, but you wish in your intention and potentially in your action, you wish the person well. So you don't, feel the emotion with, but you connect in with that suffering, but you connect more deeply to your intention to relieve that suffering. So your focus is more on the intention to relieve the suffering than on the suffering itself. And actually, again, she did like brain scans on a Buddhist monk who'd been practicing compassion for decades, Matthew Ricard, and he was able to show when he was doing the compassion practice, that it actually was kind of, lighting up different areas of his brain, was actually able to kind of counteract this feeling of like overwhelm that we get if we're taking on others' emotional states. So I think that is where compassion can offer something really powerful. And that if we can kind of practice being with and trying to relieve suffering without taking it on as our own, that can be a real gift to people that are kind of faced with suffering a lot in their day-to-day lives.
Oh, that's fantastic. I don't know, what comes to mind, right, is someone like my dad or a lot of like elderly Irish people. I think they would think that's quite cold,
Yeah.
like my dad is a big like, oh no, like, jeez, I was with him and he was really, and you can feel my dad almost suffering more than the bloke he was talking to,
Yeah.
And like for you to say, hey dad, why don't, or like X, John, whoever your name is, can you actually just tap into the point where you feel for them, you wish the best for them, you will do something good for them if you can, but you can't hold on to that suffering.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because you could see it as cold, but actually, have you ever had that experience where you're having a real moment of suffering and someone tries to support you, but they end up becoming more distressed than you in the first place, and then you end up wanting to take care of them? So actually, you think you're helping by taking on someone's emotional state. And like I say, it's not that empathy's wrong. Empathy's the doorway to compassion. So you can have, of course, it's beautiful to have some feeling with others, but not to completely, take that feeling on as your own and have that to be the dominating, but to use that empathy as then a doorway to compassion, rather than it stopping at the empathy and letting the empathy and the emotion overwhelm you completely and then feeling powerless, and and also then having the risk of even potentially putting your emotional reaction on the person that's having the suffering in the first place.
That's fantastic. Flo, is there something that we didn't cover that you thought, I think I'd like to mention this?
I guess the main thing I would say is just a shout out to all the people that are trying to create a more positive narrative. And like two immediately come to mind. Like we've talked about media a lot, and there's a newspaper called Positive News, which is like looking at what are the positive solutions focused like news stories going on in the world today. And I think that's incredible, to have. So I definitely recommend checking that out. There's also an amazing organisation where a good friend of mine works, Alex Nunn, who does a lot of stuff around compassion as well. And the organisation he works at is called Action for Happiness, which is a really kind of accessible way into like happiness tools and techniques you can use in your day-to-day life. I think that there are so many, like those are just two examples, but there are so many examples like this. And at the Network of Wellbeing, we really look at like who are the solution builders and who are those people really trying to change things. And I love that. That's what keeps me going. Like I really think if you can like look at those people that are genuinely like trying their best to like make a positive difference. And you know, none of us are perfect, but you know, there are people and organizations out there that are really making positive change. It's really, I think it can be really powerful to focus on those, to learn from them, to give your attention and energy to them.
You know, it's nice to hear also like network of well-being, in the sense that you are happy when you see other organizations promoting well-being, compared to like seeing them as rivals and like, oh god, they've a good tool there, we're going to have to steal it and say that our tool is slightly better. You know.
Yeah, no, we're all about like supporting other people and organizations that care about this kind of more, well, to use your word, Jim, from earlier, at the risk of upsetting Pep, more holistic idea of well-being.
I think that's the first time that's happened.
I can understand. I can understand. But no, like that more like looking at the whole picture and like seeing, you know, there is like a societal aspect, there's a personal aspect, there's a community aspect. This is something we all have a role to play, you know. So yeah, we're like, I think that's an important aspect of our work, like building up a network of people and organisations that want to, you know, learn from each other, support each other within sustainable wellbeing.
Amazing. Seb, do you want to ask the final question, the question that we forgot last week?
Yeah, the question that we sometimes forget to ask, to our shame, but we try to. I was going to say we always ask, we don't. We try to always ask, I should say. How do you keep on top of your mental health? You gave a few little nuggets away, like, you know, keeping the screen away just before you go to bed. But are there anything else that you do that you try to instill? Doesn't have to be every day, but just that you do when you realise that you need a bit of self-care, that you implement?
Yeah. So as you might be able to tell, I like practicing mindfulness, but I don't, you know, I know a lot of people think, oh, mindfulness, I haven't got time for that. Actually, I also, you know, I work, I've got a young kid, I've got like loads of different things going on in my life, and it's not easy to always carve out like 10 or 20 minutes to sit and practice mindfulness, but I try and embed mindfulness a bit into my day. So even if I just have like, you know, a minute or two just to like, you know, count my breaths. That's something I do quite regularly. I often do it when I'm putting my daughter to bed, like, or if I've just had a hard day, just like, you know, breathing, counting to 10, doing that for a few rounds, like that can just bring like a little bit of that space that we were talking about, that space for your own awareness, your own sense of self. And for me also, like, community like is so important for my mental health. So just connecting with like-minded people and organizations, and just feeling that sense of positive possibility through like connecting with other lovely people, basically. That just really helps my mental health generally.
Great stuff. I love those.
I don't think I've ever done this, but I felt a need to. So basically, I had an exchange of emails with Adam Starr, who we were talking about, our Buddhist friend, and we were talking about compassion. And I mentioned that we might be talking about compassion in the future, and he sent me this lovely New Year's message about compassion. And you're talking about like, it means it, like, being around community makes you feel a bit more hopeful, right? You think, oh God, I feel this and my community feels this. This makes me feel good about the future, because this could potentially happen for other people, and then they could feel that, and then they could move on. And I just, like, it just came into my head. I think you will love this. Like, the message from him was amazing, and he doesn't know I'm going to do this, but he said, I mentioned like what the world would look like if it was more compassionate. And he says, it's an important question, Jim, we need to ask. With respect to a world guided by compassion, as you say, what would that world look like? I guess it always starts with, what would my world look and feel like? From the perspective that, as a lived and felt experience, the more we can imagine that, the more we will naturally want to become it. And the more naturally we will understand everyone we meet has the same potential to do so too. No matter how crazy they act today, for me at least, that in itself, naturally gives rise to a greater sense of hope for humanity and energy to bring that more sane approach to our world and what we can do with our lives. When I read that, I just thought, what a message. What a message. Because
That's
it is,
beautiful.
because we need hope. You know, I mean, like me and Seb could do 200 episodes on well-being and trying to get this aspect and that aspect, and maybe we'll never cover hope like a complete episode. But the difference to have a sense of hope that makes you go about your day differently, you know. And I just love that, and I love what you're doing, Flo. It's been fantastic to have you on. I'm sure people are going to feel a lot more hopeful listening to this.
Yeah, and hope's a whole other topic that I could talk about for hours. So, you know, maybe in future we'll have another episode.
Well, Flo, we love you so much. We might have to
Absolutely
have you
no
on a second
problem.
and third time.
Yeah.
Nice.
If Adam starts anything to go by, we're more than happy to have repeat
Yes.
guests on.
Absolutely.
Nice.
So,
Thanks so much for your time, Flo.
well, thank you so much for your time, Flo. It's
Yeah, thank you guys. It's been really lovely chat, and like, thank you for the work you're doing. I think it's so important to break down stigma around mental health. So amazing that you're having these conversations. Thanks so much.
we'll keep plugging away.
We'll keep
conversation
trying.
by
We'll keep
conversation.
trying. Thank you.
Nice.
Thank you very much, Flo.
Okay, cheers.
Hi guys, thank you for listening to the podcast. Please don't forget to subscribe and leave a 5-star review if you haven't already. Every review helps us climb the podcast charts so that even more of you can listen to our amazing guests. We really appreciate the support. Remember to tune in next week, but until then, keep safe and have a good one.